Imagine waking up to the sound of rain, not for an hour, not for a day, but for an entire week. Your clothes never dry, the ground turns to mud, every piece of wood is soaked, the fire that kept you alive is gone. Now imagine you don't have a house, no roof, no waterproof jacket, no grocery store waiting for the storm to pass. For almost all of human history, this wasn't imagination, it was life. Around 95% of our species' existence was spent as hunter-gatherers. Long before cities, farms, or permanent homes, your ancestors lived entirely outdoors. And unlike today, they couldn't simply wait inside until the weather improved. Rain changed everything. It could erase tracks, flood rivers, ruin food, spread disease, and extinguish the one tool that separated humans from almost every other animal, fire. Yet somehow, they survived. Not just for days, for hundreds of thousands of years. So the real question isn't how ancient humans survived one rainy afternoon, it's how they survived when the rain simply refused to stop. And once you understand their answer, you'll never think about bad weather the same way again. About 300,000 years ago, the world looked nothing like it does today. Modern humans had already appeared in Africa, but the climate around them was constantly changing. Entire regions swung between wet and dry periods over thousands of years. Lakes appeared and disappeared. Grasslands became forests, then turned back into open plains. For hunter-gatherers, rain wasn't just weather. It was a force that reshaped the landscape. One clue comes from a place called Blombos Cave in present-day South Africa. Archaeologists have found evidence that people repeatedly occupied this cave for more than 200,000 years. Layers of ash, stone tools, animal bones, and ancient hearths reveal that humans kept returning to the same shelter across countless generations. At first, that seems obvious. Of course they used caves. But here's the strange part. Most prehistoric humans didn't actually live in caves. Despite what movies often show, caves were relatively rare. Many groups spent most of their lives in open-air camps built from branches, hides, and wooden poles. Archaeological sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia show far more evidence of temporary camps than permanent cave homes. So if caves weren't always available, where did they go? The answer was surprisingly simple. They followed the landscape: natural rock overhangs, dense forests, riverbanks protected by cliffs, even fallen trees with massive root systems could create temporary shelter. For hunter-gatherers, survival depended less on building permanent homes and more on knowing exactly where the safest places already existed. That knowledge was passed from one generation to the next. A valley that stayed dry during storms, a cliff that blocked the strongest winds, a grove of trees that shed water differently than the surrounding forest. To you, it might look like ordinary terrain. To them, it was a mental map of survival. But finding shelter solved only one problem, because rain threatened something even more important than staying dry: fire. And losing it could be catastrophic. Evidence from Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa suggests humans were controlling fire nearly 1 million years ago. Inside the cave, archaeologists discovered microscopic traces of burned plants and animal bones deep underground, far beyond where natural wildfires could have reached. Fire transformed human evolution. It cooked food, it produced light, it scared away predators, it hardened wooden spear tips, it made cold nights survivable. But fire had one weakness: rain. You might think ancient humans simply made another fire. Today that's easy. A lighter, a match, even a spark from a car battery. But for most of prehistory, creating a new fire wasn't guaranteed. It could take hours, sometimes longer. Some anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer societies have documented groups carrying glowing embers from one campsite to another, rather than risking the difficult process of starting over. Among several indigenous communities, keeping a fire alive became almost as important as finding food. Someone always watched it. Someone always fed it. Because once the last ember died, everything became harder. Now imagine trying to protect that fire through 7 straight days of rain. Wet wood refuses to burn. Dry tinder becomes impossible to find. Smoke clings to damp air instead of rising. Even if you knew how to make fire, nature could simply refuse to cooperate. So prehistoric humans developed another strategy. Instead of depending on one fire, they protected the conditions needed to keep fire alive. And that's where archaeology begins to reveal something remarkable. Except there was another enemy the rain brought with it, one that no shelter or campfire could completely keep away. Rain did more than soak the ground. It changed the living world around your ancestors. Within days, stagnant pools of water appeared where dry paths once existed. Insects multiplied. Rivers overflowed. Animal trails vanished beneath layers of mud. And with that came disease. Long before bacteria were discovered, prehistoric humans were already fighting invisible enemies. One of the biggest wasn't a predator. It was parasites. In 1988, archaeologists studying ancient human remains in Middenbeemster, Netherlands, and later at several prehistoric sites across Europe, identified parasite eggs preserved in ancient sediments and fossilized feces. These discoveries showed that intestinal worms had accompanied humans for thousands of years. Rain made that problem worse. Wet environments allow many parasites to spread more easily. Contaminated water collected in shallow pools. Damp ground became a breeding place for insects capable of carrying disease. You couldn't see the danger, but you could feel it. A fever, persistent diarrhea, weakness after drinking from the wrong stream. For a small hunting band of 20 or 30 people, even a few sick members could change everything. Less food was gathered. Children needed more care. Long journeys became impossible. But here's what archaeology keeps revealing. Hunter-gatherers rarely stayed trapped in one place. If an area became dangerous, they moved. Mobility was one of humanity's greatest survival tools. Studies of modern hunter-gatherer groups, such as the Hadza of Tanzania, show camps are frequently relocated throughout the year. Although today's Hadza are not prehistoric people, anthropologists study them because some of their behaviors offer clues to strategies that may have deep evolutionary roots. If water became polluted, move. If insects became unbearable, move. If game animals disappeared, move. Unlike later farming societies tied to fields, prehistoric humans could abandon a bad campsite almost overnight. That flexibility often meant survival, but moving during weeks of rain created another problem: finding food. Imagine trying to hunt through constant rain. Your vision is limited. The forest is louder. Every leaf drips. Every branch creaks. The sounds of animals disappear beneath thousands of falling drops. Tracking becomes almost impossible. Fresh footprints dissolve within minutes. Blood trails wash away. Even your own scent travels differently through damp air. For decades, archaeologists assumed long periods of rain must have caused widespread starvation, but discoveries from Gesher Benot Yaakov in northern Israel told a different story. This remarkable site, dated to roughly 780,000 years ago, preserves evidence that early humans repeatedly occupied the shores of an ancient lake. Researchers uncovered fish remains, edible nuts, water plants, fruits, and stone tools spread across multiple occupation layers. The lesson was simple. When hunting became difficult, people diversified. Instead of relying on one source of food, they collected many. Fish trapped in shrinking pools, freshwater shellfish, roots softened by wet soil, edible mushrooms, seeds, tubers. Rain didn't always reduce food. Sometimes it created new opportunities. The people who survived weren't necessarily the strongest hunters. They were the best observers. They understood how weather transformed entire ecosystems. 1 week of rain could bring fish closer to shore. Another could trigger the growth of edible plants that barely existed during dry months. Nature wasn't predictable, but it followed patterns, and ancient humans became experts at reading them. Still, food and shelter meant little if families couldn't protect the most vulnerable members of their group. Children. Human babies are unusually helpless. Compared with nearly every other mammal, they require years of constant care. That was just as true 100,000 years ago, perhaps even more so. A cold, wet infant loses body heat far faster than an adult. A soaked animal skin provides little insulation. Hypothermia can happen surprisingly quickly. So how did prehistoric parents keep children alive? Part of the answer comes from the biology of our own species. Modern humans evolved remarkable endurance for carrying infants. Unlike most primates, whose young cling to their mother's fur, human babies cannot. Someone has to carry them. Anthropologists believe slings made from animal hides, woven fibers, or plant materials likely played an important role long before permanent settlements existed, though such organic materials rarely survive in the archaeological record. But carrying wasn't enough. Groups themselves became the shelter. Research led by anthropologist Sarah Blaffer-Hrdy argues that humans evolved as cooperative breeders. Mothers were not expected to raise children entirely alone. Grandparents, older siblings, aunts, unrelated adults, everyone contributed. During long storms, that social network became one of humanity's greatest technologies. Not stone tools, not fire, each other. A child could be passed from one warm body to another. An exhausted parent could finally rest. Food could be shared across the entire camp. That cooperation may explain something extraordinary. Humans expanded into environments far harsher than those occupied by any previous human species. Not because one individual was exceptional, but because groups functioned almost like a single organism. Yet even cooperation had limits, because after days of relentless rain, another threat quietly emerged. One that changed rivers into deadly barriers and forced entire communities to make impossible decisions. Rain has a way of changing the world almost overnight. A stream you crossed yesterday becomes a river today. A narrow river becomes a floodplain. A familiar path disappears beneath fast-moving water. For prehistoric humans, there were no bridges, no weather forecasts, no maps warning that a valley would soon be underwater. Every journey carried uncertainty, and sometimes turning back wasn't an option. Evidence from sites across the late Pleistocene suggests hunter-gatherers rarely wandered at random. They followed seasonal routes that had been learned over generations. Water sources, animal migrations, and natural shelters became part of an enormous mental map passed from parents to children. But prolonged rain could erase that map. Animal herds changed direction. Fresh water became muddy. River crossings disappeared. What had been a reliable route for decades could suddenly become impossible. Instead of fighting nature, prehistoric humans adapted to it. Archaeologists studying hunter-gatherer mobility have found repeated patterns of short-term camps scattered across landscapes rather than one permanent settlement. These weren't signs of instability, they were signs of flexibility. A group might stop for 2 nights beneath a rock overhang, then move 20 kilometers when the rain eased, then settle beside a lake where fish had become abundant. Home wasn't a place, it was wherever survival was possible. That way of thinking helped humans spread farther than any other species of their kind. By around 65,000 years ago, modern humans had already reached what is now Australia. Sometime before 15,000 years ago, people had crossed into the Americas. They survived deserts, tropical forests, frozen tundra, and coastlines shaped by changing seas. Every environment brought different challenges, but rain followed them almost everywhere. Not because rain was unusual, because weather is one of the few forces every human has always shared. There's another clue hidden in the archaeological record. It isn't made of stone or bone, it's made of ash. Across prehistoric campsites from Africa to Europe, archaeologists repeatedly find the remains of carefully maintained hearths, not enormous bonfires, small controlled fires, often rebuilt in the same place again and again. That tells us something important. Fire wasn't simply used for cooking, it organized life itself. When rain finally stopped, the fire became the center of the camp once more. People dried soaked hides, repaired broken tools, cooked whatever food had been gathered during the storm. Children stayed close to the warmth. Adults planned the next journey, and perhaps most importantly, they talked. Language leaves almost no trace in archaeology. Stories leave none at all. Yet many anthropologists believe evenings around the fire became one of humanity's greatest classrooms. Knowledge about dangerous plants, safe river crossings, animal behavior, the location of seasonal shelters, everything that allowed the next generation to survive another storm. A week of rain didn't just test a group's endurance, it tested its memory, because every storm became another lesson, and every lesson increased the chances that someone, thousands of years later, would still be alive, including you. It's easy to imagine prehistoric life as a constant battle against nature. Sometimes it was, but the archaeological evidence tells a quieter story. Your ancestors didn't conquer the rain, they learned its patterns. They didn't build walls high enough to keep every storm out. They found places where the storm mattered less. They didn't expect comfort, they expected change. That may be the most remarkable part of all. For nearly 300,000 years, modern humans survived an unpredictable world without permanent homes, waterproof clothing, weather forecasts, or modern medicine. Not because they were stronger than you, not because they feared less, but because they understood something we often forget. Rain was never just bad weather. It was part of the world they belonged to, and somewhere inside you, beneath every roof you've ever lived under and every umbrella you've ever opened, is a mind shaped by people who once listened to rain for weeks and still found a way to see the next sunrise. If this video made you appreciate the roof over your head a little more, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because that's exactly why we make these. See you in the next one.